Hey y'all, it's Dr. White checking back in for week 1, Theories of Addiction and Pharmacology. I just wanted to kind of touch base. I'm not the professor who's going to read over each of the PowerPoints and provide basically reading the PowerPoint or the chapter to you. Y'all can do that. But I am going to check in and just kind of talk about some of the hot points and pose some food for thought. You'll notice that I also do that in the announcement section, so make sure that you are checking the announcement section each week because that'll also give you some different perspectives and things to think about. So with week 1, as you'll see in Blackboard, it tells you the assignments, but it also talks about what are you going to learn from this week. And one of the things that it talks about are the different models. So just to give you a brief 1-minute overview of what the models are, so we're talking about models. Some people call them theories. So you'll say theories of addiction, not theories of counseling. So this book talks a lot about different theories, and it does align with theories of counseling, but I want you to also think about theories or the moral model. So this talks about what causes addiction. So if we go back in history and you read about the history of addiction, there's a lot about the moral model. So people who drink are sinners. People who drink or use or have addiction disorders, it is morally wrong, so that person has a moral issue. So a lot of times it was treated, through the church and how people would look at it. And obviously, so if people who have addiction disorders are immoral, then what should happen? They should be punished. So a lot of the history comes out of us viewing addiction from a moral perspective. Now, when you get into the research and you learn about addiction, which you will this term, we delve more into different models or different theories of addiction. One of them is psychological, one of them is social, one of them is genetic. If you are a member of 12-Step, they often talk about the disease model. And these are all very different from the moral model. So the psychological model is basically, now, like I said, this is a really quick overview. Basically saying, okay, I have psychological issues. So say maybe I have depression or something like that. So I am going to cope with those psychological issues, traumas, stressors, etc. I'm going to cope by using. So they're saying that it is a coping mechanism. Using substances, and then you also have two problems. You not only have the depression, but now you have the addiction disorder. With the social component, it's saying that addiction is learned. So if I grew up in a household of addiction and my family used, now this can fit kind of into two models, so that can go into the genetic family model or biological, depending on where you're reading. Or it could go into learned. So if I saw somebody drink every day, then am I not learning that behavior? Am I not learning how to cope in that same manner? And that's the same. So like I said, there's a biological or genetic model as well. And this talks about how some people are genetically predisposed. So if my mom is an alcoholic, then I might also have the gene within me that says if I use, I am more likely to become addicted than somebody else who doesn't have that background or genetic component. So did I talk about all that I said? Oh, and then the disease model, basically looking at addiction like it is a disease, like anything else. If I have hypertension, if I have diabetes, why are we treating addiction different than those? And when you get into your reading, you'll learn a lot about these different models and the support behind those. So depending on what client you're working with, they might come from a different model. They might believe that that this is a sin and have a lot of guilt and believe that they should be able to willpower themselves out of it and those sorts of things. Whereas you might be coming from a more social model and talk about, okay, where did you learn this behavior? Well, maybe they learned it in college when they were 21 because they were in a fraternity and everyone around them and the peer pressure and those sorts of things. So we're going to talk in week 1 a lot about the different models of addiction. Now, the other thing I want you to think about this week, you have a couple different assignments. So you have a self-care assignment. And one of the reasons is I think it is of utmost importance that students and professionals to be ethical need to practice self-care. So I don't want to hear I don't have time or I have a job and kids in school. I agree, so do I, and so did I when I was in graduate school. But we still have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. This doesn't have to be a long day at a spa, something expensive like that, but how are you refilling your own cup? What is rejuvenating to you, refreshing to you? And those components, if we're not doing that ourselves, how can we expect our clients to do it? And a lot of times in addiction, what we're doing is we're asking our clients to change people, places, and things. So when you are doing your self-care assignment, I want you to think about maybe when you're not feeling so great. What could you change as far as people, places, and things that would help you improve your mood, your productivity, just help fill you up as a person? So relate that to yourself, but also while you're doing that, you want to think about how would this relate to a client? How could I use this as an activity or an exercise to help remind a client about taking care of their own health and maybe not using these maladaptive coping techniques like using or, whatever other maladaptive techniques that people use. The other activity, you have a basic introduction. The third activity is APA format. I do put a lot of focus on writing in this class. If you ask other students, they seem to think I put too much focus on APA. And when I say APA, it doesn't have to be perfect. I will give a lot of feedback on it, but it does need to be written at a graduate level. You need to have your name on your paper. You need to have page numbers. You need to have complete sentences and indent paragraphs and all of those sorts of things. So I do give a lot of writing on that because I think it's a level of professionalism. If you're one who struggles with writing, which I did, especially at the master's level, we have a great writing center here at Lindsey Wilson that you can use at any time. You can just send it in, talk to them over the phone. They will let you know things that kind of jump out to them. And then you can do that before your assignment, but also that'll help you correct it for future assignments. So those are the three kind of main things that we do in week 1. But what I also want you to think about, there's a video as well. What I want you to think about is, what is addiction? So what's the difference between habit and addiction? And when does somebody's, let's say drinking, when does somebody's drinking go from socially acceptable behavior to becoming an actual disorder? So think about that. And then I also want you to think about how addiction is treated differently than other mental health disorders. So one of the things that the objectives say for this week is that you're going to learn about different substances. So here's your big old book, your DSM. And the addiction section starts on page 543, and it is a long section because it talks about everything from tobacco addiction to gambling addiction to stimulant addiction, but it gives a lot of additional information about culture, about statistics and all of that. So if you don't have the newest updated DSM, highly recommend it. Like I said, page 554 is what we're going to focus on in this class, and we're going to think about why do we treat, if in this book we have depression and we have schizophrenia and we have generalized anxiety and then we have cannabis use and we have, a bazillion different ones. We have dyslexia. Why are we treating addiction disorders in a different way, maybe at a different facility than we are with other mental health disorders? So think about that and think about how history has played a part in that. And are you really using different skills, different techniques, different theories when you're working in addiction than you are when you're working in what we call traditional mental health? Which personally I believe there's a lot of overlap, especially if you believe in the psychological model. How can you treat one without treating the other? So there's been a lot of change over the last 20 years specifically in how we treat addiction disorders in the mental health field. We used to say, You come over here for your mental health concerns, and you go over to this agency for your addiction concerns. And now there's a little bit more of an overlap, or agencies who are like, okay, we treat both addiction and mental health disorders. When in actuality, here's the umbrella of mental health, and addiction is just one of the things under there. So we've seen a big change in that in the last 10 years. So I, just want you to think about what are some of the pros and cons of treating them. Maybe they won't get specialized treatment. Maybe we can address two birds with one stone, insurance things, transportation issues, the barriers to treatment, all of those components that are kind of wrapped up in addictions treatment. So even if you're taking this class because you have to and you don't really want to treat addictions, I'm here to tell you that no matter what, you will come into contact with clients who are impacted by addiction. And you'll say, Dr. White, I'm only going to work with little kids. Yep. I've treated kids as young as 9 with addiction disorders. Dr. White, I'm going to work with marriage and family. And people's moms or dads or siblings are impacted by addiction, and then maybe they've lost somebody to addiction, so they're coming to you with grief and loss issues, but it's related to addiction. So even if you are not looking to go into the addiction field, I think that this class is of utmost importance, because I truly believe that everyone is impacted by addiction. So think about how you would treat addiction versus how you treat other mental health disorders. Think about the causes of addiction. What causes it? Is it peer pressure? Is it learned behavior? Is it maladaptive coping? Is addiction a disease? Is it biological? Also think about self-care and what activities you do in the class that you can apply to your clients. So that's week 1. Make sure you read your chapters, go over all the information in Blackboard, and I'll check back in with you next week. Bye, y'all.